Okay, so get ready, because today we're diving into some serious science stuff. We're tackling evolution, but not the kind they probably taught you in school.
Yeah, we're going deep into a paper by Shapiro and Noble.
And let me tell you, these guys are not messing around. They're like big shots in evolutionary biology,
Oh, it's
right?
absolutely highly respected in the field.
So their paper, and get this, it's published in a really prestigious scientific journal. It basically says that the traditional view of evolution, the modern synthesis, it's like way outdated.
Mhm.
It's like finding out, I don't know, like the Earth isn't actually round, but way more complex and interesting.
They make a very compelling argument. Essentially, the modern synthesis, while groundbreaking for its time, just can't fully explain all the new discoveries we've made in genetics and molecular biology.
Okay, so for those of us who haven't been brushing up on our evolutionary biology lately, what's the big deal with the modern synthesis? Why is it so outdated?
Well, in a nutshell, the modern synthesis, it portrays evolution as this slow, gradual process driven by random mutations and then natural selection kicks in.
Mhm.
Survival of the fittest, right?
Right.
But it turns out it's not quite that straightforward.
Okay, so where does it go wrong? What are we missing?
One of the biggest things is that it oversimplifies how DNA actually works.
Mhm.
It presents DNA as this static blueprint, but it's so much more dynamic than that.
Oh, okay.
It's like this code, and there are all these complex mechanisms controlling which genes are turned on or off, when they're turned on, how they're turned on. It's incredible.
So it's not just the genes themselves, but how they're used.
Exactly. And there's more. The modern synthesis also has trouble explaining things like symbiogenesis, which is the idea that some of the biggest leaps in evolution, like the formation of complex cells, actually happened through these symbiotic mergers between different organisms.
Right, like the whole mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell thing. It's mind-blowing that those were once separate organisms. It
It's
makes you
right.
look at your own body differently. But the modern synthesis doesn't really account for that, does it?
It doesn't, and that's a major gap. And then there's this whole other layer of complexity it basically ignores. Junk DNA.
Jump DNA, right.
Those vast stretches of DNA we used to think were useless. Turns out they're anything but. They play a crucial role in how genes are expressed and regulated, which totally changes how we understand how traits are passed down and how new ones pop up.
Okay, so we're talking about a whole new level of how evolution works. So if the modern synthesis is so flawed, what are Shapiro and Noble suggesting we do? Throw out Darwin altogether?
Not at all. They're advocating for what they call the third way of evolution, which isn't about replacing Darwin, but expanding our understanding of how evolution happens.
Okay, less dogma, more discovery. I like it. So what are some of the key ideas behind this third way? What makes it different?
Well, one of the most fascinating things is this idea of natural genetic engineering,
Okay.
or NGE for short. Basically, it suggests that organisms, they aren't just passively waiting around for random mutations. They can actually, in a way, influence and even restructure their own genomes, especially when they're under stress.
Wait, so you're saying creatures can actually change their own DNA, like on purpose? Like they're aware?
It's not conscious awareness, but it is a far more active and responsive process than we previously thought.
That's incredible. It's like evolution has a secret weapon.
Exactly. And it challenges another core idea of the modern synthesis, that strict tree of life concept, where each species branches off neatly from a common ancestor.
Yeah, I remember that from biology class.
Well, the third way shakes that up with this concept called horizontal gene transfer.
Horizontal gene transfer. Okay, that sounds interesting. What's that all about?
So horizontal gene transfer, it's basically this idea that genes can jump between organisms, even across like totally different species.
Whoa.
Yeah, it's kind of like evolution taking a shortcut,
Yeah.
instead of waiting for those random mutations and then that gradual selection.
So instead of that neat family tree, it's more like a messy bush with genes going everywhere.
Exactly. And it's happening all the time, especially in the microbial world, like bacteria.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it explains like how they can develop antibiotic resistance so quickly.
Yeah.
They're not just evolving on their own, they're sharing those resistant genes with each other.
Wow, that's kind of scary. Like they're waging war or something.
Yeah, it's like this hidden battle going on.
Wow. But this horizontal gene transfer thing, it's not just happening in bacteria, right?
Right. There's evidence it's played a role in more complex organisms too, even us. Like some of our genes might have actually come from viruses or bacteria way back when.
What? No way. So we're all walking around with these little pieces of ancient DNA. That's wild. Makes you realize how connected everything is.
Absolutely. And that interconnectedness, that's a key theme in their paper. They argue We need to move away from this idea of individual species, battling it out for survival,
Yeah.
and embrace a more holistic view of evolution,
Okay.
where cooperation and collaboration are just as important as competition.
I like that. So how does this new understanding of evolution, this third way, how does it change how we see ourselves, especially now with all the challenges we're facing?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Right.
And while the paper doesn't give us easy answers, it does provide a different way of thinking about our own evolution.
Okay, so how does the third way change the way we think about humanity's future?
Remember, we talked about organisms being able to influence their own genomes in response to stress? That natural genetic engineering
Yeah,
thing?
like they've got this inner evolutionary toolkit or something.
Exactly. And the thing is, humans are facing some pretty intense stressors right now.
Yeah, true.
Climate change, pollution, all of it.
Yeah.
So the question is, could these stressors be triggering our own evolutionary potential?
So you're saying humans are like literally evolving right now,
Yeah.
adapting to this crazy world.
It's definitely possible. While we haven't seen these big evolutionary loops in humans lately, there's evidence our genomes are constantly responding to environmental pressures.
Like what? Give me an example.
We'll take lactose tolerance, for example.
Mhm.
That's a relatively recent adaptation that lets humans digest milk into adulthood.
Oh, yeah.
It spread quickly through certain populations because it gave a nutritional advantage, in cultures that had domesticated cattle.
So our diets affected our genes.
Exactly. And it shows how cultural practices and environmental pressures can work together to shape our evolutionary path.
Right.
It's not just random mutations anymore. It's this dynamic interaction between our genes, our behavior, and the world around us.
So we're not just along for the ride, we're actually kind of driving.
Exactly.
Right.
And when you add in things like gene editing and other biotechnologies, it raises even more questions about where we go from here and what it means to be human in an age of, directed evolution.
Okay, now we're getting really deep.
We are, but it's an important conversation to have. Because understanding how evolution works is one thing, but grappling with the implications, that's where it gets really interesting.
I totally agree. And speaking of interesting implications, the paper also mentions this idea of niche construction, which sounds like it ties into all of this. What's that all about?
Niche construction.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like, you remember we talked about it before, right? It's that idea that organisms don't just adapt to their surroundings.
Right, like,
They can actually change them too.
yeah, like beavers building dams or
Exactly.
earthworms like tilling the soil or something.
Yeah, and it's always been one of those things where it's like, oh, that's cool. But Shapiro and Noble, they're saying
Yeah.
it's not just some quirky thing,
Yeah.
it's actually a major player in driving evolutionary change.
Okay, so how does that work?
So imagine this, an organism, it changes its environment somehow, right?
Okay.
And that creates new challenges for the next generations.
Right.
And those challenges, they can actually favor certain genetic variations, which speeds up evolution.
Mm.
It's like a feedback loop where organisms are shaping their own evolutionary path by how they interact with their environment.
So it's not just about adapting to what's already there, but like creating the conditions for new adaptations.
Exactly. And this is where it gets really mind-blowing. When you think about humans, we're like the ultimate niche constructors.
Right. Because we've changed the whole planet.
Exactly. We've built cities, we've farmed huge areas, we've even changed the climate. We're constantly shaping the environment,
Right.
and that environment is shaping us right back.
It's like we're in the driver's seat, but we might have taken a wrong turn somewhere.
Yeah, it's a powerful analogy.
Yeah.
And it shows how important our choices are now. We're basically choosing what we're going to have to adapt to.
Wow. It's kind of scary, but also amazing.
It is both. It means we have a huge responsibility to make smart choices because they'll affect not just us, but generations to come.
This whole deep dive has been incredible. It's really changed how I see evolution.
I'm glad to hear it. It's a field that's constantly changing, and who knows what we'll discover next.
I can't wait to find out. That's it for this deep dive. Thanks for listening.